Thank you for watching BWTV. We're at the Grand Canyon Baha'i Conference in Phoenix. My name is Nickoe and I'm here. Our guest for today is Ivan. Can you tell us what inspired you to do the paintings?
I had a show around 1992 in a gallery in Tucson, and it was like an abstract show, and someone called Barry Horst and Mrs. Sears came along and bought a painting and said, would you be interested in... They heard that I traveled to Iran and lived in North Africa and India, and they said, would you be interested in documenting the faith, Baha'i faith? We have a school called the Desert Rose School we're going to be opening. They told me the principles of the faith, and I said, that sounds really interesting. I believe that, equality and universal equality and women's and racial equality, but where does it come from? And they said Iran, and I said, oh, that's the worst place I've ever been in the world. And they said, well, that's because the light has to come from the worst place, so it includes everyone when it shines in the world. So the first painting that I was asked to paint was the Conference of Badasht, which was this painting, Tare removing her veil at the Conference of Badasht. Mrs. Sears had a studio that they gave me a big studio and a lot of material. And every day visitors would come and visit Mrs. Sears, and she had many friends from all over the world. This is a large painting. It's at the Desert Rose Institute, and for the beginning I started to paint all the fezzes in red and paint the costumes in red, because that's what I thought that the people wore at that time. And these Persian people would come from Haifa going, oh, you know, they only wear black fezzes and Persians only wear black, so I had to change all the costumes. And then one day I did the Baha'u'llah's tent right in the beginning, and someone said, was visiting from Haifa, that said, oh, I have a photograph of Baha'u'llah's tent that we have over in the Holy Land, so I'll send it to you in a couple of months. And I didn't think too much of it, but anyway, a couple of months later the photograph arrived in the mail, and I didn't have to change this tent at all. This is exactly as I first thought of it, and it's identical to Baha'u'llah's tent. It was around that time I thought, this is really inspired. So, you know, this is Tare teaching in Mashhad, and Tare was born in Mashhad, but it was debatable at first whether she ever visited Mashhad, but it was a beautiful setting to do the painting. And this is the Byzantine concept. The Byzantine church were under persecution, and they used to hold their church masses, and then they would have the scene from the beginning, a biblical scene from the beginning, and then the main scene in the center. And then if they had to move churches, they used to fold it up like that, so it folded in the middle. So this is a triptych. That's where the principle of this paintings came from. So that's the idea behind this painting. Now, this was 20 years ago that I began, so I've been painting these ever since. But my very last painting that I became interested in is Vahid's Feast, and I can show you that. This is Vahid's Feast, and what is interesting about Vahid, who's in the middle, is he was asked by the Shah, Mohammed Shah, to investigate the truth. He was not really interested in the Babi movement, but he was asked by Mohammed Shah because he was his most trusted courtesan or person of the court, his main advisor, to go down to Shiraz from Tehran to visit the Bab. And he, on the journey, had many questions to ask the Bab. And when he went about the Quran and some questions like that, when he went to meet the Bab already knew the questions he was going to ask and had the answers already. So Vahid became a Babi, and a very famous Babi, and he invited all. He is a very wealthy man. He had a house in Yazd, so this is a feast. He held a feast in Yazd, Nowruz, in 1850, and he invited all his wealthy clergy, explained to them about the feast, the Bab's movement, the Babi message, the Bab's message. And so what's interesting about Vahid is he knew everyone. He knew Baha'u'llah and the Bab and Mullah Hussein and Tahirih. So there's something about unity. So he held this big feast and explained to them all about the faith. And there was some people saying it was more luxurious feast than the Shah's feast that happened to be at the celebration at the same time in Nowruz. What's very interesting, I put Yazd, the famous mosque in Yazd, to show you where it's situated. On the very same day in Nowruz, 1850, they rounded up 7 innocent Babis, and they held the first public execution in Tehran. So this is the mosque in the main square of Tehran. And there's a hadith that says on the day of judgment, the 7 goats will lead the shepherd. So this is symbolic of the shepherd up at the left-hand corner with the 7 goats, which is the hadith. So the 7 martyrs are here, and the first martyr was the Bab's maternal uncle. He was such a revered person in the community that the executioner didn't want to use his sword, and he made an excuse that he had to sharpen his sword. So that's why I put that scene there. So then someone had just arrived from the Hajj dressed in Arab robes, and he was saying his prayers, and they executed him in the middle of his prayers. This is a dervish, a famous dervish that was executed at the same time. And then this gentleman, I'm not sure of his name, but he said, "You can't execute me because I'm such an influential mullah in the city." And he said, "Well, I have a warrant for your arrest, for your execution," and stabbed him in the stomach. The last 3 was so close that they were fighting each other to be executed first. So they executed all 3 at the same time. When Nabab heard about the martyrdom of the 7 martyrs, he said that's the meaning of the hadith, that the 7 martyrs will lead the shepherd. I'm the shepherd, and these are the 7 goats. And he was martyred about a month later. And so that's my last historical painting after 20 years.
What materials do you use to make your paintings?
Okay, I use oil paints, and I work on about 4 paintings at the same time, and so that the oil is drying on one painting, and I go along 3 or 4 paintings at the same time, and each painting takes me 2 or 3 months.
How did you become Baha'i?
It was at this exhibition that I had in Tucson at a gallery, and I was painting abstract at the time, and that meeting that I had with Mrs. Sears and Miss Barry Horst, I became Baha'i.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.